2026 has turned out to be the year that some of the biggest shows in modern pop culture finally came to an end. Stranger Things wrapped up right at the start of the year. The Boys followed a few weeks ago, and then Euphoria quickly closed out its run. Some of the most watched and talked about series of our time have now reached their conclusions, with The Bear also set to end in the coming weeks. Whether that's good news or bad news really depends on how much you trust showrunners to stick the landing, because making a final season of a show is arguably one of the hardest things to do in television, probably right after crafting a compelling pilot. When millions and millions of people are invested in your story, satisfying everyone is simply impossible, and that's why so many people have come to believe that a good series finale is a myth. With the recent history of big shows ending in disappointment, it's easy to understand why that belief persists. Of course, we tend to remember the bad endings more vividly than the good ones, and I've certainly contributed to that conversation. I recently made a lengthy video explaining why the ending of Stranger Things is, in my opinion, one of the worst of all time. But it's also important to acknowledge that there are excellent series finales out there, endings that close things out in a way that feels memorable and satisfying for both the story and the characters. Fleabag delivered one of the best finales I've seen in recent years. Cowboy Bebop has one of the greatest endings in television history, and we recently had the finale of Succession, which was brilliant. The Leftovers has a great finale. The ending of 6 Feet Under is widely considered to be perfect, and Pantheon has what I would probably call a top 5 greatest TV ending of all time. So it is possible to end a show well, but the curse of final seasons is something that very few writers manage to escape, and we can see that struggle playing out in 2 recent juggernauts that came to an end. Let's talk about them, starting with The Boys. The Boys is now officially over after 7 years on the air, and this was always going to be a difficult show to end, given that it features what is largely accepted as one of the greatest villains in the history of the superhero genre, and an absurd number of quotable lines from Carl Urban. There was a huge amount of expectation riding on this final season, and ever since it ended, there's been a lot of debate about whether the series actually stuck the landing. I understand the divide among the audience, because the answer to that question lies less in the finale itself and more in the entire final season, and that's where the conversation becomes genuinely interesting. I've never made a video about this show before, so let me give you a quick roundup so you know where I stand. Season 1 was a spectacular season of television. I loved it incredibly much. The way that season introduced us to its world, first through the eyes of the general public who believes superheroes are amazing saviors, and then through the lens of someone who gets to see firsthand what is hiding behind that hopeful facade, was just brilliant. The writing was tight, the characters were intriguing, the reveal of Homelander at the end of episode 1 immediately put him in legendary status, and the social commentary, the satire of corporate shenanigans taking over aspects of our lives, capitalism and superhero media, all of it was pitch perfect. 9 out of 10, instantly iconic. Season 2 was a really solid follow-up that didn't quite reach the heights of the first season, but was still amazing on almost every level. With Stormfront as an incredibly strong antagonist, well-handled subject matter, insane character arcs, especially when it came to Homelander, and that Victoria Newman twist was diabolical. 8 out of 10, I couldn't wait to see more. Season 3, in my opinion, comes very close to being the best season of the show, with Season 1 just slightly above it. Season 3 was so much fun, such an entertaining season of television, with the addition of Soldier Boy, Temp V, Butcher with laser eyes, Butcher and Soldier Boy in a 2-on-1 against Homelander, the Black Noir storyline, Queen Maeve's character arc. This season went so hard. It wasn't as thematically strong as Season 1, but it was some of the most fun television we've had in recent years. 8.5 out of 10. I genuinely didn't think this show could ever let me down, and then Season 4 let me down. Despite some minor issues with the show beforehand, The Boys had this consistent quality of writing that made it magnetic and incredibly exciting. The first 3 seasons were an astonishing streak of being absurdly entertaining while having a surprising amount of depth, and Season 4 is where that streak ended. It was the first time I felt bored watching The Boys. The season isn't atrocious, it's not unwatchable garbage, but there's a significant and noticeable decline that's very telling. This is the point where the show starts to feel tired, where the logic behind continuing this story is being stretched, and it really feels like it's probably time to wrap things up. There are characters the writers clearly don't know what to do with. Some of the magic just isn't operating anymore, and the story has gotten ridiculous to a point that isn't really entertaining. There are still moments to enjoy, and the performances remain amazing. That was always one of the show's biggest strengths. But overall, Season 4 is a bit of a jumbled mess with too many characters who aren't as well written as they used to be. Weird narrative decisions that rely too much on shock value, and a story that's starting to wear thin. 5 out of 10. And that leads us to Season 5, the final season, the big conclusion to 7 years of television. And honestly, it's not very good, is it? As a big fan of this series, despite Season 4 being a bit of a letdown, I came into Season 5 hoping for the best. I really wanted to trust that Season 4 was just the show having a bad day at the office, and that Season 5 would close things out in a grand and epic way. I tend to trust Eric Kripke. He's really passionate about the stories he tells, he cares deeply about characters, and he has a great sense of spectacle. But surprisingly, as far as epicness goes, Season 5 feels really cheap. It's kind of the least epic and smallest scale season of the show, which I find very jarring, because Season 4 ramped things up in a way that really signaled Season 5 wouldn't be able to possibly get any bigger. The reason I find this bizarre is because of the sheer scale of the marketing campaign. The posters alone promised something so epic and massive that it built crazy momentum. Homelander in space looking over Earth being ravaged with nuclear explosions, Billy Butcher walking in front of the fallen Vought Tower, and even the poster for the finale showing Butcher walking up to the White House with Homelander hovering over it, and an army of supes behind him, all emulating the big White House finale from the comics. The marketing campaign was promoting the fulfillment of the show's promise, the promise of ending by going scorched earth. But instead, in its big final run, the show has never felt this small. It feels like 80% of the season takes place on the same 4 sets, and you can just tell the season is operating on a very tight budget, which Eric Kripke has been very open about. And while the show has never felt this small, the bigger problem is that the stakes have never felt so muted. The stakes don't feel as tangible as they did in previous seasons, which is frustrating because Season 5 does try to establish a certain sense of urgency, but for a number of reasons, it just doesn't land. I'm only speaking for myself here, but I think the reason is that Season 4 set up a lot of things that Season 5 turned out to not be interested in at all, and most of that starts with the characters. One of the biggest criticisms that can be attributed to The Boys in its last 2 seasons, and my personal biggest gripe, is that the show is not really sure what to do with most of its characters, and in many cases, it ends up choosing to do nothing. So many characters who used to be integral to the DNA of the show are just kind of there. They're not really doing much, and even though this is the final season, it doesn't seem like the story intends to end for them. And even when the plot is interested in them, so many choices are either weird or very obviously a result of the show needing to downscale things. The weirdest example is Billy Butcher. Season 4 ends by turning him into what looks like the final boss. He rips Victoria Newman in half like he's speedrunning a Mortal Kombat fatality. Let me remind you that earlier in that same season, we watched Victoria Newman take a bullet to the head and walk it off with a smile. She's basically invincible. She's not an easy person to kill, and Butcher ends her while knocking out half the room. His demeanor completely changed. He walks away, looking like a Terminator. The message is very clear. Butcher has become something different, something terrifying. He makes it clear that if any of the boys stand in his way, he will kill them. There's no care anymore. He's just a killing machine, on a mission to end Homelander. And then Season 5 immediately walks all of that back. It largely strips him of his power. You're lucky if his tentacles can even grab someone accurately. He barely uses his powers throughout the season, and on the sporadic occasion where he does, they're not that useful. Personality-wise, he's not the Terminator anymore. He's basically just regular Butcher again. It's one of several moments in the season where the show feels like it forgot what it was setting up just minutes earlier. Huey is a character that has been directionless for the past couple of seasons, one of those who are just kind of there, and he's not nearly as important to the story as he used to be. With his dad dead and his good boy persona kind of gone, the only thing about him that could be interesting is his relationship with Annie, which I find to have grown surprisingly stale over the years. These two still being together has not made sense to me in a very long time. Annie herself is a character that hasn't made sense to me in a very long time. She's taken a very passive role in the show this season. and after the events of the first 3 seasons, I really thought we were gearing up for her facing Homelander again after leaving Vought. But Annie and Homelander do not speak to each other for all of Season 4 and all of Season 5. It feels like a very incomplete thread. And Annie is now just a passive part of the team that sometimes fights people and punches them repeatedly. Season 4 had also set her up as having unlocked crazy power, but it never plays a part in Season 5. is just kind of there, as he has been since Season 3. And Frenchie is also just kind of there, as he has been since Season 3. There are too many characters whose presence just feels tired to me. The more I think about it, the more I don't think I will ever understand what the point of the new Black Noir was. He made absolutely no sense to me. Sure, he was there to give the public the impression that the Seven were still united, but in terms of the narrative, what was that? There are so many things that felt like a setup with him that never lead to anything. We're told he has to mute a lot of his powers to embody Black Noir because he doesn't have the same powers. We're explicitly shown this guy can fly, and it's implied he has powers more similar to Homelander's, but then that never plays a part in anything. He just has a petty argument filler arc with the Deep, and then he's strangled to death, and he never had anything to do with anything that was going on. This season also makes some choices narratively that I found a little convenient. In order for things to function, the show really asks you to push and stretch your suspension of disbelief. I rolled my eyes at the screen when we were told the boys recreated Soldier Boy's blasting power in Kimiko in like a day, because that just feels like treating the audience like idiots. If it was that easy, why was this not Plan A? The part that really made me sad to realize as the season went on is that I just kind of stopped caring. I could feel my investment in the show dissipating every week. I was bored with the story, I didn't feel any stakes, there was too much filler, and I no longer trusted the show to stick the landing. I didn't care about the V1, I didn't care about the religious psychosis, I didn't care when Frenchie died, I didn't care when Firecracker died. Her death scene was very well executed, but I just didn't care about her character very much. A lot of people are painting her as a martyr now, because the episode where she died tries really hard to make you sympathize with her. But in case you forgot, Firecracker was a white supremacist who regularly hooked up with underage boys. She is not a good person, she is not a victim, and she is definitely not a martyr. Ironically, I think the absolute peak in character writing this season was with A-Train, who is only in the season for about 10 minutes of the first episode. The strongest scene in Season 5 is the final scene of Episode 1, when Homelander chases A-Train through the woods and ultimately kills him. A-Train making a split-second decision to not repeat what he did to Hughie's girlfriend Robin in Episode 1, which is essentially what sent him to his death, is his story arc coming full circle. He finally has the courage to stand up to Homelander and realizes he doesn't understand why he was so afraid of him because he can finally see Homelander for what he really is. An insecure, pathetic man-child with nothing. That was a great moment, with Homelander choking him out of anger, while A-Train just keeps laughing at him until he dies. I really believe this was the show setting the tone for the rest of the season. But unfortunately, the season doesn't keep that energy. And that brings me to today's sponsor, Whatnot. Whatnot is the #1 live stream shopping app, with an insane variety of categories to choose from. Trading cards, electronics, clothing, and way more, all in real time. There's something for everyone here. A great social community for enthusiasts and collectors who like to get their items from like-minded people. Take me for example. I'm absolutely obsessed with comic books, and in the past year, I've really been enjoying finding very rare vintage editions to just have in the vault. All you have to do is go on Whatnot, find a live stream that catches your attention, and you can immediately start making live purchases. It's that easy. Click my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to get $15 off your first purchase anywhere on the Whatnot app. And if you follow me on Whatnot at that Space Ninja, you will automatically be entered to win $500 in Whatnot credit. The winner will be picked in 1 month. Thank you so much to Whatnot for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to the show. Season 5 is mainly about the boys and Homelander discovering there is a secret old formula of compound V, called V1, that can essentially make someone immortal, and everybody wants to get to it first. That's kind of the plot of the entire season. For a final season that is throwing a lot at you, it's also pretty uneventful, and the characters aren't interesting enough to carry a season severely lacking in story. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that Anthony Starr has been carrying the boys on his back since season 3. Homelander is one of those rare villains that feels genuinely iconic, and a huge part of that comes down to Starr's performance. What always made Homelander so compelling wasn't just that he was powerful and had anger issues, it was how weirdly specific his psychology was. He had this unspoken rule where he often spared people who weren't afraid of him, because fear was the thing he craved most from people he couldn't get respect from. He wasn't motivated by money, ideology, or even world domination in a literal sense. What he wanted was validation. He wanted love, admiration, worship. He wanted to be seen as a god, while simultaneously being desperate for someone to hug him and tell him he's special. That's what made him fascinating. He was the most powerful man on Earth, and also the most emotionally fragile. Every room he walked into felt like it could either end with a handshake or a massacre, depending on whether somebody bruised his ego. In the first 3 seasons, every time there was a scene with Homelander, I felt physically anxious because you never knew when he was going to snap. The problem is that starting around season 4, the writing begins stripping away a lot of those layers. Homelander becomes less of an unpredictable narcissist and more of a generic crazy guy. Earlier seasons treated him like a ticking time bomb whose actions were driven by a bizarre combination of insecurity, loneliness, narcissism, and a desperate need for approval. You never quite knew what he was going to do, but you always understood why he did it. And he was smart. I think the show forgot over time that he had the ability to pull some really good moves that didn't necessarily involve him just snapping necks. In season 1, he single-handedly orchestrated a terrorist attack from a foreign country by giving Compound V to maniacs so Vought could justify integrating Soups into the military. He was making moves back then. But by the end of the show, that complexity starts to wear thin, and Homelander often feels reduced to angry man with laser eyes. Anthony Starr is still giving an absolutely phenomenal performance, but it increasingly feels like the script relies on his performance to make the character work. And it's a shame, because the writing behind him used to be incredible. And of course, you can't really talk about season 5 without talking about what it really is, for half of its runtime, which is the Soldier Boy show. I like the character of Soldier Boy a lot, and I love Jensen Ackles in that role. But his presence in this season feels so out of place, because it is out of place. Everyone has said that his presence in this season is just an extended ad for a spin-off series coming out soon. And people are right. The entire Bombside storyline felt so forcefully shoved into this season, all just to introduce us to characters that are not going to matter to the story we're currently watching, but that are going to be in the spin-off. It's really sad, because it demonstrates in a very obnoxious way that The Boys has become a lot of the things it used to criticize. It used to make fun of the overly corporate approach to intellectual properties and franchises in Hollywood, with everything needing a sequel and a spin-off, and the setting up of these endless projects overriding the story of the thing you're currently watching. And that's what this season does for about half of its runtime. Naturally, it doesn't help that the episode before the finale is easily one of the weakest episodes of the show. In the end, I think season 5 is just very forgettable. It's not insultingly bad, it's not Stranger Things season 5, but for a show that has proven to be capable of being one of the most thrilling things on television while having very smart and poignant social political commentary driving it, it is astonishing to see just how boring, aimless, and opportunistic this final season is. Some people have tried to say that criticizing the show for butchering 4 or 5 episodes of the season wasn't that big of a deal, that it was just 4 or 5 episodes and people were overreacting. I heavily disagree with that. Back in the day, you got 24 episodes a season, so if you messed up 4 or 5 of them, it wasn't the end of the world. But when you only have 8 episodes and you mess up 4 or 5 of them, that's a different conversation now, isn't it? If there is credit we can give this season, it's that for how ridiculous the political aspect of the show has become. Sometimes being overly tacky, the season did predict actual events with almost godlike accuracy. The God thing where Homelander wants to be God, and then before the episode even airs, Trump puts out that photo of him as Jesus, and it's just unsettling. The show went from being a satire of American politics and how embarrassing they've become to being a literal parallel that mirrors real-life events just a few days before they actually happen. We are living in a time where it's become normal for satirical parodies to feel more like preemptive documentaries than the jokes they are supposed to be. But that's not enough to save the show. So after all of that, is the series finale of The Boys terrible? Is it absolutely amazing? It's okay. It's fine. It's not unwatchable, it's also not that good. It's just kind of mid, a 5 out of 10. It's not an awful finale. It's an entertaining episode of TV, but the best way I have to describe it, and describe why it didn't land for so many people, is simply that the finale is a decent episode that has to close out a terrible season. Because the season was so underwhelming and meandering, it felt very difficult to feel the hype of what was going on, and it no longer felt like we were concluding a great story. Most characters didn't have arcs anyway, but the finale tries to pretend they did, and that's the big mistake a lot of writers make, trying to shove every important ending point into the finale. The entire final season kind of messes around and doesn't really do much, and then suddenly in the finale, way too much happens. But nothing has time to breathe, because you can only fit so much inside of an hour-long episode. One thing the finale briefly touches on that I actually found interesting is Annie realizing she's become exactly what she promised herself she would never become. When she first joined Vought, she looked at Queen Maeve and saw someone completely broken and emotionally checked out. She swore she'd never end up like that, and then she did. That's a genuinely compelling idea. But the problem is, the show waits until the final episode to bring it up. Annie spends most of the season doing absolutely nothing, and suddenly the finale remembers she used to be a character. The same issue applies to Ryan, and basically the entirety of Gen V. Ryan was built up for years as one of the most important people in the story, and then he barely participates in the final season. Meanwhile, Gen V spent 2 seasons setting up Marie Moreau, Sam, the virus, and a whole bunch of supposedly world-changing developments that ultimately amount to forgettable cameos. Marie was positioned as one of the few people who could potentially challenge Homelander. Sam was basically being framed as Homelander 2.0. The virus was treated like a game-changing weapon that took so much space in the entire story. And none of it matters. 3 years of setup leading up to 2 scenes, missing one of those characters, by the way, nobody does anything, and then they disappear to Canada. What was the point? Well, we'll never know, because Gen V was canceled after its 2nd season, and we'll never get an ending for these characters. But aside from establishing that everything built up through several shows in the last 3 years ultimately doesn't matter, the finale's biggest problem is, again, the scale. Yes, just like in the comics, the final battle of the boys takes place at the White House, but under drastically different circumstances. Still, in the comics, the Battle of the White House is much bigger in scale. With the military there, a big soups war, absolutely bonkers. But again, the scale of the show in Season 5 feels incredibly small, so the entire fight takes place between 3 people in the Oval Office. It's sort of entertaining if you turn your brain off, but if you stop for 1 second to think about it, this battle makes absolutely no sense. Homelander lasers Kimiko like 3 times, and she's only kind of knocked back for a second, but in Episode 1 of this same season, he lasered her once and sliced her in half, and she literally had to regrow the bottom part of her entire body. I could point out a million of these things, but there's no point. I kind of accepted after Season 4 that I couldn't use my brain for this stuff anymore. The fight is okay, nothing really impressive, it has its moments, but I just expected them to deliver on the scorched earth promise that had been shoved down our throats for the past 4 years. There are incredible 3D artists who made short films depicting Homelander truly going scorched earth, destroying cities, killing countless innocent people. That's kind of what I expected him to do. I always believed there would be a final moment of Homelander going way too far and showing the absolute monster he is for everyone to see. The fact that we never actually got to see him fully going berserk and unleashing his power and all the rage he's been bottling up for years is a little disappointing. The Boys has never shied away from being so balls to the wall, and this was the worst moment to choose restraint. Instead, they make his big going too far moment more of his religious psychosis thing, which I don't like. I think it's so unnecessary. He didn't need that to snap. We've been watching that escalation for years. It works thematically in the idea that Homelander can ultimately never accept love. He wants so desperately to be loved, but he wants it on his own terms. And he needs it to be fundamentally unconditional. He needs to be worshipped. He needs to be adored. But even when people do love him, it's never enough. He will always find a reason to reject it. and he will never be satisfied. Thematically it works, narratively it's a mess. So we get a WWE match in the Oval Office. Kimiko blasts everybody, and they all lose their powers, and the end of Homelander is pretty much everything I expected it to be, and I'm okay with that. I think he's a character who had to be stripped of any shred of dignity he could possibly have left. He had to be so overwhelmingly pathetic in his last moments, and they pulled that off. Anthony Starr, once again, is just a beast of an actor in this show. I think regardless of the quality of the boys going down, his performance as Homelander is something for the ages. Watching Butcher beat the ever-living out of him and seeing him beg for his life in the most disgraceful way imaginable, even if I found that ending a little unambitious and predictable, it still felt satisfying to watch. And that's sort of the emotional point of the finale that really worked for me. Butcher accomplishes his ultimate wish to kill Homelander and get revenge for Becca, but he realizes that doesn't really change anything. They kill Homelander, but with Vought still at the top of the world, it's only a matter of time before another soup takes his place. So he wants to keep going. Let's not just kill Homelander, let's kill all the soups in the world with the virus. Butcher dying at the hands of Huey was kind of the most predictable thing of all time. I'm pretty sure everyone knew that was coming. The scene is fine. I didn't really feel that much emotion watching it, but it's executed well enough. It all just feels very rushed and underdeveloped. My personal opinion of the finale is that it's trying to force 2 episodes of TV into one when it really didn't need to do that. Defeating Homelander should have been the second to last episode, and then the finale should have been about Butcher's heel turn and Huey being forced to stop him. This whole section from Butcher snapping and Huey following him to Vought, it all happened so fast and you can really tell the episode had to blast through it because it was running out of time. The ultimate issue with this ending is that it fails to fulfill any promise it set up. If you wanted scorched earth, you get a slightly beaten down room. If you wanted a thematic resolution to the commentary behind the story, there isn't any of that. Because starting in Season 3, there was a very important shift in terms of what the endgame was going to be. The original big bad of the series wasn't Homelander. It was Vought as an entity, as everything it represents. There was an understanding in the DNA of the story that this wasn't a show just about beating up a man-child Superman. It was about dismantling a system engraved in society and run by a corporate entity with too much power. From the literal superpowers of the maniacs it controls, to puppeteering the government, orchestrating wars, manipulating crime, all of it for the sake of profit. That's where the biggest part of the commentary that made the show lied. Sure, the show promised that Butcher's endgame was going to be his final stand against Homelander, but as a whole, it was always understood that the show's endgame would be with Vought, and then the show kind of just forgot about that. By the end of the series, nothing has really changed. Homelander is dead, but the characters didn't really solve the problem of the show. Homelander wasn't the problem. Vought was the problem. Homelander was a symptom of the problem created by Vought. I never really thought the show would end with Butcher exterminating soups, but for a while, my personal theory was that the show was going to end with the boys destroying everything that is left of Compound V, which would have ensured that soups would die out with the current generation. Because remember, Homelander was an anomaly, and soups are not supposed to be able to naturally reproduce, which is something the show also forgets about because Annie is pregnant at the end. But since the show shifted its focus from dismantling a system to just kicking Homelander's ass, watching this finale left me with a feeling of the show being weirdly incomplete. The series finale was entertaining at times, but emotionally I came out of this final season feeling absolutely nothing. Eric Kripke has recently said that he apologizes if people did not like the ending, but that he really did tell the story he wanted to tell. And I believe him when he says that, which is more than I can say about the showrunner of Euphoria. So, Euphoria finally returned with its 3rd and final season, which means 2 things. 1, we are free from this, and 2, so is the cast. I don't think anyone is happier about the show being over than the cast. It took 4 years for this season to come out, which is absolutely ridiculous. And you would think that after all that time, we would be coming back with a season that would have been worth the wait. But this is Sam Levinson we're talking about, so you just kind of know you're in for a bunch of nothing. Somewhere along the way, Euphoria stopped being a show people watched because it was powerful and emotionally resonant with themes that reflected modern youth, and became a show people watched to laugh at. It's the latest hate watch contestant in pop culture. While Season 3 was airing, A friend told me she felt Euphoria had become the new Riverdale, and honestly, I haven't been able to get that comparison out of my head ever since. A show nobody can take seriously, but that for some reason they keep coming back to out of morbid curiosity. In the early days, people were talking about the characters, the themes, the performances, but now most of what I've seen about the show in recent weeks is people sharing clips on TikTok being like, "What was that? This show is nonsense. It's bad. Sam Levinson needs to be arrested." So Euphoria has finally ended, and I feel like everyone is relieved. Much has been said about how wildly disjointed this season has felt, how tonally inconsistent all of the characters and their stories have felt, and how completely different this season feels to the first two seasons of Euphoria. It literally feels like a completely different show. Season 3 of Euphoria is without a doubt some of the worst writing the show has ever produced, which is honestly impressive considering Season 2 was essentially 8 hours of absolute nonsense. The biggest problem isn't that the season is messy. Euphoria has always been messy. The problem is that the chaos used to come from the characters. It used to serve the characters and the story, but now it feels like the characters exist to serve the chaos. In other words, Season 3 is a shallow piece of media with no meaning and no depth that throws things at you just for the sake of it. This season takes place 5 years after the end of Season 2. The characters are now adults out of high school and college, and their lives are very different. I could walk you through it, but the reality is, it doesn't matter. All you need to know is that Rue now works for this guy and has to do some really illegal stuff to pay off a debt she owes, and everything else that happens around that one plot point is completely pointless and has no correlation to anything you've seen in the past 2 seasons. This is basically a reboot of the show. Visually, the show remains stunning. The visuals are packed with gorgeous cinematography, dreamlike imagery, and enough slow-motion shots to give Zack Snyder a reaction. But narratively, the season feels more interested in shocking the audience for no real reason than telling a coherent story. I found the main story of the season to be incredibly contrived and utterly boring. The crime underworld story was a snooze fest only there to let Sam Levinson be the edgelord he is. I don't care about any of these characters anymore. They no longer have anything to do with the characters I knew at the beginning of the series. None of them are likable except maybe Rue. None of them are redeemable. Some of them die out of nowhere. Honestly, I don't think the show has ever made me laugh harder than when they reveal Nate's dead body. That scene is so ridiculous, it reminded me of that scene in Pretty Little Liars when the girls open the trunk of the cop car and find a dead pig in it. You have to be 12 years old to gasp at this, but I'm certain Sam wrote this thinking, "Ooh, I'm so dark and edgy. I'm such a provocateur." I did like the actor playing the crime boss character. He's always so good in whatever he does, but the character itself is just whatever. Kind of a generic kingpin, a nothing burger. He only works because of the performance of the actor playing him, which you could say about virtually everyone in the show after the first season. The entire season feels like Sam Levinson watched Sicario or a Tarantino movie and thought, "I could do that too," and then he spends 8 hours proving he absolutely cannot. This might as well have been a new show because even the characters feel like completely different people, and with the exception of Rue, nothing that happened in the first 2 seasons brings any sort of coherence to what's going on with them in Season 3. Can somebody explain to me why Sam even bothered to write Jules into this season? Genuinely good for Hunter Schafer, get that paper, but it's so apparent the whole season that Sam Levinson has absolutely no idea what to do with this character. Generally speaking, Jules is a character Sam never really put any thought into past Season 1. She doesn't do anything the entire season, and then she doesn't even get an ending. She hasn't had an arc since the special episode about her after Season 1, which is probably one of the best episodes of the show, but overall, we just kind of lost the plot here. The wedding episode is the clearest example of this. It appeared to me as the moment where the show fully jumps the shark and stops pretending there's a larger purpose behind any of it. Drama no longer exists to further character themes or push the story forward. It exists because the show has become addicted to escalation. Every scene has to be louder, crazier, more shocking and edgy than the last, regardless of whether it makes any sense. And the result is a season that feels strangely empty despite all the screaming and crying. It's chaos, sure, but it's not compelling chaos. It's narrative brain rot dressed up in expensive cinematography. The season becomes increasingly obsessed with themes of sin, shame, guilt, redemption, and God. And when you combine that with the show's portrayal of sex work and how reductive it is towards sex workers, it creates a worldview that feels surprisingly judgmental, not nuanced, not complicated, just degrading. A huge portion of Season 3 revolves around sex work, and the way the show handles that topic is strange, to put it mildly, because the more time you spend with these storylines, the more it feels like the series isn't actually interested in understanding these characters as people. Instead, it often comes across as viewing them through a lens of judgment and ridicule. Almost every sex worker in the season is portrayed as self-destructive, morally bankrupt, stupid, naive, or some combination of the four. And when nearly every depiction points in the same direction, it starts to feel less like storytelling and more like Sam Levinson is working through a personal grudge. It is incredibly clear that he despises sex workers and looks down on them, and Sam seems to be taking great pleasure in humiliating these characters every chance he gets. This has been very present in his projects since Season 2, and especially with The Idol. Sam Levinson has always had this recurring theme of punishing promiscuity, and there's no difference with Season 3. There's a cruelty to the way some of these stories are presented, as if the show is refusing to explore these people's lives and instead punishes them for having them. Cassie is a great example of this, a character that essentially became absurd comedic relief that by the way was hugely offensive to sex workers and OnlyFans models. In fact, there was a controversy after the episode where she goes to the doctor came out, and the stuff that she's depicted as doing on OnlyFans, like the baby play and the pet play, is literally not even allowed on the platform, and it feels like a conservative guy trying to fearmonger about what the most depraved idea of an OnlyFans model could possibly be. What's the most offensive thing? Sexualizing literal babies, not even something that these women are allowed to do. And again, for a show that is so obviously and violently anti-sex worker specifically, it never even tries to get into the systemic issues at play here. It never gets into who the clientele is, or why they are dangerous, or the real-life dangers and lifestyle of what life is like for sex workers. This show just seems to think that these women are stupid, and they get themselves into these situations by being dumb and naive and greedy. I'm obviously not the most qualified person to talk about that in depth. All I have is my own opinion, and I'm not a sex worker. But you can look it up. A number of sex workers have come out to stand against the show's depiction of them, especially throughout the second half of the season. Whether they be porn stars, OnlyFans models, strippers, you name it, hundreds of them have been very open and vocal about how harmful and damaging this show is to them, the image of their profession, to the public, and by proxy to their safety. Sam very clearly looks down on those people, and he's not shy about showing it, and it's made even worse by the overwhelming religious angle of the season. Somehow, despite discussing two completely unrelated final seasons in this video, both of them have to do with religion overtaking the story out of nowhere. The season becomes increasingly obsessed with themes of sin, shame, guilt, redemption, God, and when you combine that with the show's portrayal of sex work and how reductive it is towards sex workers, it creates a worldview that feels surprisingly judgmental, not nuanced, not complicated, just degrading. The further the season goes, the more it feels like the characters aren't really being filtered through a human lens, and that's the Sam Levinson way. And this is where we have to talk about Sam Levinson, who is definitely the real antagonist of this show. By the way, I've heard people refer to Sam as the most overrated man in Hollywood, and no, he's not. Newsflash, you can't be overrated if nobody likes you. And Sam knows people don't like him. He's very aware of that, because he constantly uses his shows and his movies as a way to complain about the fact that people don't like him. Malcolm and Marie is pretty much just Sam Levinson being a crybaby and thinking it's unfair that critics don't like his work, but at the same time, he kind of likes it. See, the thing with Sam Levinson is his head is very, very far up his own ass. He made the first season of Euphoria, it was successful, and now he actually deluded himself into believing he is a living legend and a genius even though literally everything else he's ever made has been poorly received. The reason why he loves the controversy around his work is because he thinks he's a mastermind. He 100% believes he's the best. He himself refers to The Idol as revolutionary. He genuinely thinks it's brilliant. When The Idol premiered at a festival, and all those articles started to come out about the production troubles of the show, the one thing he had to say about all the criticism was, "When my wife read me the article, I looked at her and I said, I think we're about to have the biggest show of the summer." And that right there is the big tell. Sam just wants people to talk about him. He doesn't care if it's positive discourse or negative discourse. He just wants the attention. As long as you're talking about him, he loves it. After all, he is the ultimate edgelord. He does edgy things because he wants people to notice that he's doing edgy things. And because he deluded himself into thinking he's a super genius, he thinks he's a true master at work, and continues to make his stuff more and more edgy to try and get more and more attention. Sam Levinson has a certain track record with the types of stories he tells. He loves to portray young women being sexually abused and/or exploited, and I don't mean that he does it with a point or a message. What I mean is, his stories often are excuses for him to simply depict gratuitous artsy imagery of young women being mentally or sexually abused, just because it feels more like a weird fetish he gets to put on screen for himself, rather than him having to say something about the topics. Some examples of that are the infamous Russian roulette sequence in Euphoria, the Lily and Nick scene from Assassination Nation, the studio scene from The Idol, or even the hairbrush scene where Tedros spends an entire night repeatedly beating Jocelyn with a hairbrush because her mother used to do the same thing, and they think that if he makes her experience that again, it'll inspire her to make good music. I wish I was lying, but that's a real sequence. And of course, there is one little moment from the pilot of The Idol where he kind of explains it out loud through the mouth of one of his characters. Are we romanticizing mental illness? Absolutely. Mental illness is sexy. Given how his shows usually are, I am convinced that this scene is literally just Sam Levinson telling his audience why he writes female characters the way he does. Whether it's Jocelyn in The Idol, Marie in Malcolm and Marie, literally any female character in Euphoria, the depiction of young women in brutal emotional distress as a result of abuse or mental health issues is almost like a kink to him. He doesn't repeatedly show it in every single one of his projects to drive a point across. I think he does it because he just finds it interesting. The funniest thing about this season, though, is just how obvious it is that its narrative is entirely constructed around the schedules of the actors. There are so many things happening in this season solely because they had to work around schedules. Nate's entire storyline, where he is mostly by himself until he dies in the dumbest way possible, just screams that they had Jacob Elordi for maybe a week, where nobody else was really available, so they had to get him to do something by himself. Even the scene where his dead body is revealed to Cassie and Maddie, you can tell from how it's edited that he definitely was not on set with them. The entire storyline with Rue meeting up with Jules is very obviously set up the way it is because they probably couldn't have Zendaya and Hunter together for more than like a day or two, so let's stick them together in a condo and have them talk about nothing. Cassie is, well, she's never really up to anything, but Sam Levinson really likes certain things, and Sydney Sweeney is down for anything, so that's that. Anyway, a bunch of things happen for no reason, and then Rue dies. That's kind of the big thing this season. Rue's death is incredibly contrived and not earned at all. The way we get to it is kind of stupid, but to be fair, the scene itself, cinematically speaking, is very well executed. It's visually beautiful, it's incredibly well acted, and the score works. It's a very pretty scene. It's very nice to watch. It's so well put together. But it doesn't change the fact that it is narratively weak. It's trying really hard to be poetic. But again, depth is not something Sam Levinson is particularly good at. He's about as surface level as a leaf in the ocean. If you cried at this scene, I think it's very easy for filmmakers to manipulate you, but that's a whole other conversation for another video one day. Rue's death doesn't feel like the end of an arc. Sam Levinson said it felt like an honest ending, and I would have understood that if the season would have been about her relapsing or a more connected story about the addiction that has been such a part of her character since season 1. But no, she's just tricked into overdosing. And it's not like I'm surprised. I expected Rue to die. The second the season starts and they're like, Rue has been clean for a while, it's like, okay, she's dead. I know Sam Levinson way too well. He's not doing that for any other reason than gearing up for something shocking, because shock value is everything to him. And he seems to believe that doing shocking things means the show is deep and whatever. But it's not, and it's just not well executed. I guess it works for the narrative Sam was going for, even if it's a bad one, but I just found it very cheap. Ali going to get revenge for Rue in this shootout is just, what are we doing? This is so weak. Ali abandoning everything he believes in and giving a speech essentially saying that helping people the way he has is futile, only to get into a shootout because we're trying to be Tarantino here. Just put me to sleep already. I'm glad at least that Ali is played by Coleman Domingo. That makes him stomachable to watch. I genuinely believe Coleman Domingo is genetically unable to flop. Despite the horrifyingly atrocious script, he manages to still remain present and to deliver, and to give Ali a screen presence that makes it bearable to watch. But the storyline is just so weak. This moment in the finale made me realize that at some point Euphoria turned into a show for fans of Ryan Murphy. And if you've seen this video, you know what I think about Ryan Murphy. I think he's a showrunner whose approach to storytelling often prioritizes shock over substance. And this is kind of how I feel about Sam Levinson now. It's just edgelord content with a pretty color palette, but it doesn't make it any less of lazy edgelord content. And that's ultimately what makes so much of Season 3 feel hollow to me. Euphoria constantly wants credit for tackling serious subjects, but it often treats those subjects like visual accessories rather than meaningful character exploration. The trauma becomes the spectacle. The suffering becomes an aesthetic. At a certain point, it just feels performative and frankly really boring. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's the exact same criticism many people, me included, had of The Idol. Different show, same pattern. I don't want to spend forever rehashing that argument, but I think it's impossible to watch Season 3 and not notice how many of the same creative instincts have followed Sam Levinson from one project to the next. It gets tiring to watch this show being so utterly convinced it is much deeper than it actually is, to be much smarter than it actually is, because it is just trash TV trying really hard to cosplay prestige television. I really thought I would have more to say about the season, but surprisingly, not really. It was just really boring. And despite the fact that in terms of viewership, this was the most popular season of the show, the response to it online has been shockingly quiet. There just wasn't that much of a big response to it. People very much received this season as something anecdotal. It just kind of came and went, and people have already moved on. 3 seasons in 7 years, and it feels like the majority of people experienced the ending of it with a bit of a shrug. I still have appreciation for Season 1, which is the only good season of Euphoria, the only one where the commentary felt like it had a soul. And I genuinely believe that had Euphoria been a one-season limited series that shook pop culture back in 2019 and had ended there, it would have been remembered as probably one of the best limited series of our time. But now Euphoria is just this never-ending punchline that everybody will remember for being unhinged and stuff. And okay, cool. I guess that's also a legacy. But it's just crazy that this is where the show ended when you look at where it started.